Warning, this podcast episode contains spoilers for the movie Abigail. Hello, and welcome to the inaugural episode of Uncertified, which is the smaller episode series that we're going to start doing with Certified Forgotten. If this is the first episode you're listening to, Certified Forgotten is the bi-weekly podcast that talks about horror films with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. The idea is that some films are certified fresh, some films are certified rotten, and some films are certified forgotten. However, as part of that, my esteemed co-host and I are starting a new shorter series to talk about newer releases, things that might still be maybe even in theaters, maybe just released on home video, but things that kind of capture the spirit of Certified Forgotten and that they're great horror films that people are passionate about and that they're going to be rediscovered by new generations for years and years and years to come. And that's kind of the pitch. So this is going to be short. We're going to keep it under 30 minutes. We might even get around 20 minutes if we're lucky, but we're going to talk about a movie today that a little bit of a newer release. Donato, anything you want to throw out there to set the mood before we get started?
I'll put $20 down that we do not keep it to 20 minutes. We say this, and no matter if it's a Patreon video, no matter if it's an episode, we're going to keep it short and sweet. We're going to hit our time limit. We know it. There's no shot we're hitting 20 minutes, but I love your optimism.
I am nothing if not an optimist. All right. So for our first episode of Uncertified, we were thinking, what is the best, what could be the most representative of a Monagle and a Donato movie? Like, how can we kick this thing off just right? How do we talk about good movies that are bigger releases and blah, blah, blah? And what we landed on for you today is Abigail, which may still be playing at the dollar theaters near you, but recently hit the theaters, did okay, and hopefully will be coming on to home video soon. So quick pitch, if you haven't seen it, Abigail is the latest feature from horror collective Radio Silence, and it follows a group of criminals who are paid a tidy sum to kidnap and babysit the daughter of a wealthy businessman. But because you've seen the trailer, I've seen the trailer, everybody's seen the trailer, you know that's not what happens. It turns out that Abigail is a ballerina vampire who plans to eat her way through the hapless home invaders. Starring horror favorites, I'm going to say it, horror icons Melissa Barrera, Dan Stevens, and Catherine Newton, Abigail is a raucous blend of horror, action, and comedy that manages to maintain its head of steam right to the very end. So, Donato, when we were talking about kicking off this series, there were a lot of different things we kicked around. We had a Slack channel that was going for a couple of days. We're like, we could talk about this one, we could talk about this one, we could talk about that one. And what was really important to both of us as we were sort of like teasing our criteria for what an uncertified film could be out of the air, one thing that we just landed on is we want them to be good movies. We want them to be movies that we really enjoy, that we think people will enjoy, that sort of capture the spirit of Certified Forgotten in the sense that it's going to be really fun for people to discover these. I imagine countless Reddit threads in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years time where they're like, did anybody else see this vampire movie Abigail? And I think this is a really good start. And I think it's a really good start because it kind of lands in the middle of our sensibilities too. But I want to start with you talking a little bit about some of the writing that you did on Abigail, because you actually, this is a twofer for you. You don't always do this. You did the release feature, interviews with the cast and filmmakers, and you reviewed the film. So talk a little bit about the IGN piece you wrote.
Yeah, so one of the things I ditched in my writing career earlier on, I wouldn't say early on, but like earlier on, were interviews. And the simple reason was that the sites I was writing for did not pay enough to make them worthwhile. There are a lot of time, there are a lot of transcribing, there are a lot of many things that go into a piece like that. And smaller sites just unfortunately don't have the cash to really make that bang for your buck. Like, right. You have to do interviews at that point that you're passionate about. So
you can barely get a review of an indie horror film published, and based on your interest, like getting time with talent from a publicist time, like they're offering a lot of these folks constantly, right? It's the easiest thing in the world to get the opportunity to sit down with them. But a movie that's sort of maybe too small to be covered, not that Abigail was that, but a lot of that stuff is no editor worth their salt is going to give you the money you need to go do an interview with the filmmaker.
No, so that is to say, I still do interviews. I love doing interviews. When the pay is right, I'm just going to be really blunt on that. So, like when a site like an IGN or an Inverse or someone else who can pay a little more comes out and says, "Hey, yeah, do you want to take this interview with Radio fucking Silence and Melissa Barrera and oh my god, I'm blanking on the name of little Alicia Weir." As our ballerina vampire. So like I got all
Yep.
four of them and I was like, yes, I will do that. Yes, I will absolutely do that for you. So went to the junket, got to sit down with all of them, 15 minutes with Radio Silence, and unfortunately 5 minutes with the two actresses, which is kind of a bummer. But you get what you can with those junkets, and you don't really say anything else. And yeah, it
It
was
makes
really
it
good.
makes that first question like essential because if you a lot of times when you sit down with an interview, right, like you try and throw out a softball to set the mood, but they will spend 5 minutes answering your softball questions and then you're fucked.
A 2-on-1 especially, where like
Yeah.
a 1-on-1 is one thing with 5 minutes, but a 2-on-1 with 5 minutes, because if they start bantering and going back and forth, you're fucked. So I got some really good stuff out of both of them. I've really loved Melissa Barrera's answer to, I kind of said, hey, one of you is playing a villain and one of you is playing the quote unquote hero, let's say protagonist in this film. Would you ever love to switch roles? And especially like Melissa Barrera, who is being pegged as a final girl at this point, go back to
Yeah.
Scream, go back to her career. So that is like where she's getting stuck in. And Barrera's like face lit up when I asked if she wanted to be a villain. And like she got so weird. She's like, let me play a troll, let me play a fairy. I want to play like a really weird creature. And I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, this is exciting. This is why I asked these questions. And it's a lot of really great stuff from Radio Silence because I'm just enamored by how they can blend entertainment with horror. And I feel like they've really cornered the market on making really good popcorn entertainment horror films, aside from, let's say, Devil's Due. I think that's their only miss, and everything else is prime radio silence. And I am I got to talk to them a lot about blending comedy with really gross out gags, and also you made a vampire movie that's really drenched in not only blood but also love for the genre and references to other movies.
Hmm.
So it's like, hey, how do you spare, let's say, some originality for all the other near dark poster reenactments and things of that nature. And like they laugh so hard, they're like, we didn't even plan the near dark thing. Like
Yeah.
Dan Stevens, we shot him with the blood cannon, we looked and we're like, oh fuck, that's near dark, we can't
Oh
not
yeah, that's
use
Bill
this.
Paxton all the way for sure.
Exactly. So so much stuff like that. Also hearing how much fun the cast had. Like go read the IGN article. I won't belabor it that much, but the cast was so involved with Radio Silence. And my one tidbit I'll say is like Dan Stevens picked out his own wardrobe. He signed on
Hmm.
late to the project. He showed up. Everything they picked for him just didn't work for his vibe. And he took the costume designer out and they just went shopping. And that is how we got the Dan Stevens we got in this film. But yeah, it was so much fun to do that piece. And my love for the film, it's not influenced by the interview, but like I was able to use some of those anecdotes to go into my review and like kind of better appreciate it.
Yeah.
And I like the movie. Like that's my thing always. I reviewed the film for myself. It was, I I've got to this point where I don't want to pitch everything. I'm just tired and I can't. And like there are some movies like Furiosa last night where I got invited to screening. I didn't pitch a review out because that's a staff, or like that's a staff review on any site.
Yeah. Yes.
It's probably not going to go to a
They're not
freelancer.
going to freelance that one out. Yeah.
Right. So like Abigail was the same thing where didn't get it anywhere, and I was kind of like, I'm a Rotten Tomatoes critic. What the fuck am I doing? So like I've just started writing my own reviews and posting them on the Tomato Meter. And yeah, like I had this draft written up before I did the interview because if you're an aspiring critic, that is what you should be doing.
Hmm.
Never write your review after you do an interview if you're even doing both, which I understand a lot of other people
Yes.
don't like. I know there's a thing of like if you're doing the review you shouldn't do an interview. I
Never
do
do
get
both
that.
for the same site. Not that the same site
Yeah.
would ever let you do that, but never do both for the same site.
Yeah, but like even my hard fast rules, like if I'm going to do the interviews, I'm going to write my review before I even do those because it's like I want my review to be my review. That's it. No influence,
Hmm.
no nothing. So, yeah, I sat down and like, talking about writing that, and the short of it is I think it's a really good movie. I don't think it's the best of the year. I don't think it's going to be in my top 5 for horror at the end of the year, but I really like Monagle saying before this is a Donato and a Monagle movie. The Donato aspects work really well. I just think it's a little too long, unfortunately. It's not the that's a 90-minute right there. That's a really tight 90
That's
minutes
true. Yeah.
if it was there, and it's not. There's about 20 extra minutes, and we can talk about that in a little bit, but other than that, my god, it's so bloody, it's so fun, and I still think Radio Silence are one of the kings of like just really, really, really entertaining horror movies that know how to get you smiling and also then just hit you with those pops of horror that like understand the genre so much.
Yeah, and I like that you brought up, the talking about the comedy and the horror thing, right? Because that's something we talk a lot. Our guests on Certified Forgotten don't always bring us horror comedy. A lot of times, just because of the stuff that meets the criteria of 10 reviews or less, it tends to be international. It tends to be dark and often a little weird because those are the movies that people skip over and don't review when they're going to film festivals. But you and I have a shared appreciation, frustration, love of horror comedies, because I think that even though you are much more inclined to like a horror comedy than I am, we both come to it from the same place, which is like, and you wrote about this in your IGN interview. If you're not careful, a horror comedy turns into either like a cartoonish horror movie or a like really cringy, like a really bloody, the balance is just not right. um, and that's actually something I know you gave it a perfect score. I'm actually not the world's biggest fan of Ready or Not, because I think that Ready or Not, even though the cast is fantastic and Samara Weaving is a fucking goddess, like the balance, it doesn't maintain that for me just right. I love where it ends up in like the last 10 minutes with some of the reveals that it does, but throughout it's doing a little bit more. It's kind of stumbling a little bit more with its confidence in terms of that balance of horror and comedy. And that was something that I really loved about Abigail. And one of the things I walked out of Abigail thinking is, what makes this movie different for me is that it has somewhere to go at the end of Act Two. Because a lot of the horror comedy movies, by the time they get into the second act, you're sort of like, well, you have to commit to being horror or you have to commit to being comedy. And odds are you're going to just move more into one or the other, and it doesn't the balance isn't quite right. What Abigail does, which I think is really brilliant, is it goes to a whole different place in the third act. It becomes a different kind of vampire movie. It levels itself up, and it almost becomes an underworld movie in for the last half hour, 40 minutes or so. And I love that because that gave it somewhere to go. So it sort of is fighting with itself in the midpoint of the movie, which it is in terms of like, is it going to be funny? Is it going to be gory? Like, where's its, what's going to be the final reveal? Rather than having to commit to one of the two paths that you're sort of getting comfortable and tired of, it introduces this whole new level. It's like the Spinal Tap, this one goes to 11 thing. It does. It suddenly pulls a whole new gear out of its ass, and it's doing a whole different type of movie that is somehow different than, and also the culmination of everything that has been doing before.
Yeah, and I really like how Radio Silence lean into them. There's no better way to put it. Like Radio
Right.
Silence said in my interview, they were like, "Listen, we just love making these fun-filled horror movies about people who enter a scenario thinking it is one thing, and as the night progresses, it is completely something else, and they're probably all mostly going to die." And that
Mm-hmm.
is most of their movies. Like they're not hiding that. That's that. It's starting in VHS, even like 10/31 98 or whatever the date is of their segment. That's exactly what that is. Some dude bros think they're going to a Halloween party and they end up not at a Halloween party. And that is the template for all their movies. And I think they do it so well that this never felt like Ready or Not 2.0 or anything. It's
Right.
not, because Ready or Not is a perfect movie. Monagle, you are correct. That
Sure.
is one of my
That's
like
fine.
only perfect ratings I've given in the recent years.
It's no
Um,
Tucker and Dale versus Evil. That to me is the perfect horror comedy.
Also amazing. I am not going to fault you on that one. But what Abigail like lacks for me in the setup, let's say a little bit, and I feel like it takes a little too long to get going, and then it'll hit you with two kills, and then it takes a step back again. There's just the pacing is just a little wonky for me, but doing all of those other aspects that Radio Silence is good at, this is still such a like endearing horror comedy in the way that it has quotable lines. Number one, I mean, I'm going to be talking about the onion line forever. Like that's
Yeah.
in my mind. They're so good
That's
at
a
taking
fucking onion.
tropes. It's a fucking onion. Like they take a trope and they just turn it into this huge joke. That whole scene where we have three of the criminals thinking they're like, yeah, let's just take care of this little ballerina vampire. What's the big deal here?
Mm-hmm.
And then they come back licking their wounds after getting the shit kicked out of them, and more than that. That is Radio Silence doing what they do best. They take the stereotypes, turn them on their head. The violence is very enjoyable. Everyone's like going kind of bonkers in the scenario. We have our ballerina vampire just cackling and having fun the whole time. And then you get the shot of Melissa Barrera's face as they come back, like, yeah, you guys done? You do your little thing there, you have fun. What'd you find out? That is when Abigail is at its best. And there is a ton of that still in Abigail for as long as it is, and wherever it may stumble for me, all of those other elements that pull it back up, like it gets pulled up so high. And we got to talk about, like, again, like the violence, like the way they take the exploding people from Ready or Not and dial it up to 20 in
Yeah.
the vampire culture. Like they know what they're doing. They know how to get a rise out of you and how to hit you with something explosive and keep that momentum. Even when it falters a bit, they pull it right back up. So that is where Abigail, where like a lesser horror comedy that doesn't understand the horror aspects as much or isn't as funny, yeah, that's this would flatline. Like it would absolutely flatline. It would never come back. But Abigail just like it just keeps resuscitating itself, and it's like it's just too good when it's good. It's too good when it's good.
And I think a lot of that, and I will give I'll give credit to this in Ready or Not as well, is I think Radio Silence has this remarkable ability to get a certain type of actor to work with them. Samara Weaving, Dan Stevens, Melissa Barrera, Catherine Newton. I think of all of these as actors that could have very traditional Hollywood careers, right? Like very, and as a matter of fact, Carlos Aguilar has in his interview, he did this really great feature where he talked to Dan Stevens and asked Dan Stevens basically, did you want to be a leading man? And his answer was sort of like, not really. Like I think that is the beauty of in this particular movie, what makes this movie work so well, but just sort of in general, the through line of a lot of the work that they've done is they're working with actors that are doing horror but are not horror actors. Like Dan Stevens is a fucking star. I don't care if that Hollywood casting directors agree with me or not, but he is a conventional leading man. He could carry franchises. The same could be said of Brera. Same could be said of Newton. These are incredibly talented leading actors, but they're twisted little fucks. They have fun making horror movies. They like making choices like this. These are not things that I would imagine these aren't things that any self-respecting agent would be like, your next step is to go make Abigail, which is a movie about a ballerina vampire, right? This is not the, 5 years to Oscar path that a lot of them are on. And so I think that there's a sensibility that Radio Silence has as filmmakers that the cast really taps into. It goes back to what you said about, them having a really good time, the cast loving working on the film. I think that it's sort of like a wavelength thing, and it's something I hope to see them continue to do. Is if they're able to find, I there's a lot of actors that come to mind when you think of. I think Jake Gyllenhaal is a great example of somebody who is should be a movie star, but also doesn't really like he likes doing Okja, he likes doing Roadhouse, he likes doing weird genre stuff. Like he likes being ugly on the inside, pretty on the outside. And I think Radio Silence has this great lane that they're occupying where they're pulling in talent that are like, yeah, I mean, I could go do, whatever book adaptation is going to launch on Netflix and be talked about for 10 minutes and go away, or I can do this weird pulpy genre mix thing that's going to make me somebody's favorite actor for years and years and years to come.
Yeah, I really do want to harp on, like, number one, you left out Kevin Durant there.
I'm sorry.
The disrespect, sir.
You know what? And he's having quite a year too with Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. He's killing it right now.
Kevin Durant, I mean, you just have to go back and watch what this guy's been doing, whether it's indie horror films or and bigger than that. Like Kevin Durant's been in a lot of stuff. I mean, one of the earliest things I saw him was Smoking Aces, and forever I was like, this guy rules. Just being that kind of character. Also, a really funny thing that Radio Silence kind of like broke accidentally, and no one picked up on, but it's still in my interview. Is that like I was like, oh, Kevin Durant's like bulkier than usual. And they're like, well, yeah, he's bulking up to play He-Man. And I forget if it was Matt or Tyler. And then one of them says it, and the other looks and goes like, no, it's not He-Man, it's Hulk Hogan. And I looked at them both, and I was just like, that's not announced anywhere. And they're like, yeah, Hulk Hogan. And I was just like, okay. So it's hilarious to me that we're getting a Kevin Durant Hulk Hogan, and like that's why he was big in this movie. But like that dude is so talented, and the chemistry he creates with Catherine Newton, where like Newton is playing the rebellious nepo baby who's kind of there for kicks, and what we get out of Duran's just muscle bound but also father like figure. Them working together, I think, is some of the best examples of how the cast comes together, and also like what Radio Silence can do with their cast. I mean, Dan Stevens, of course, too, as well. Like we get him playing a fucking a Queens cop, like beat cop who was like undercover at one point, and you get that sleaziness, you get that like he spent too much time there, and like that's who he is now. And when he turns, it's like that is, sorry, it's been out for a little bit. We're talking about a movie. I hope you saw it, but his portrayal of as things go to shit is so good. And it's
Yeah,
him. That's my weirdo Dan Stevens. That's whenever I say like weirdo Dan Stevens is having a hell of a year, and he is. Go back to Kong and Godzilla, and go back to everything else he's been doing this year. Like Cuckoo, it's not out yet, but
yeah,
trust me, you're gonna get some weirdo and Cuckoo. I adore the fact that he's able to get, as what you just said, like Radio Silence brings these actors in and gets them to like really just submerge themselves in the horror genre and play around in it, not just like play a stuffy stereotypical typical character. Even Giancarlo Esposito, that's easy.
you got it.
Um, his turn, yeah. Not gonna say what he is. If you haven't seen the film, I'll obviously leave that for you. I don't know why you're still listening, but A-list people doing what some other, outsiders might describe as a B-level horror movie, and that coming together, like I love how Radio Silence gives B-level horror like that prestige. And I think that's what Abigail is. It is a B horror movie masquerading as a big budget blockbuster in a way. Whether that's looking at the cast or looking at everything else about it, and you know, it sucks that it underperformed technically. Like I the
Yeah.
fact that it didn't make as much as people thought it would or kind of had to is a bummer for the genre at large. And if we're gonna get original stories, we have to support them and all, but still, what was accomplished, I'm absolutely going to be rewatching Abigail and adding that to the physical collection. There's no doubt.
Yeah, because you think about kind of like the movies that are in this lane of things, right? Like Megan is last year came out, same sort of horror comedy niche, right? Same sort of like modest but not, shoestring budget, same sort of like cast of people who horror fans like. That I mean that was an icon. That blew up and it made tons and tons of money, to the fact that we're certainly getting more. And so there's a part of this like, hey, I am glad that I don't have to do box office, forecasting as part of how I write about film, because I don't know. It's like, it's a good movie. It should have made, 10 times its budget, whatever. Um, but I do think, I think that there's the thing that kind of comes to mind a little bit when you talk about the way that all of these people fit together is, we'll call it the Nicolas Cage of it all, right? Because I think of Nicolas Cage, part of the reason why he's one of my favorite actors, part of the reason why I love him, which is a much less controversial statement now than it was 10 years ago, um, is the notion that he can go out and do something like Pig or Joe, and then he can go out and do, I mean, the unbearable weight of massive talent. He can do any number of Renfield, any number of like low and high budget horror, and he kind of approaches it with the same level of curiosity. His interviews are like must read entertainment for those of us that like horror. There's just sort of a, I do this because I find it interesting and because I find it fun, but I can do the other thing. Like, I'm still really good at the other thing, right? I can do the thing that's gonna, have me doing the Hollywood Reporter roundtable conversation at the end of the year, where I'm talking to a Paul Giamatti or a Denzel Washington because they had new movies that came out. I love the balance piece, and I I hope that we're getting to a place where a movie like Abigail, and again Megan, very similar, so I don't want to knock it too much, but horror needs to be a little bit more fun sometimes. I know you and I both agree with that very strongly. I think we're at the tail end of a cycle where horror is all, bleak examinations of trauma and tragedy. That's fine. That really helped establish the genre for the eyes of a lot of folks that weren't horror fans. They could see it as something more, right? Like, it met them where they're at, and that's great. It really opened the doors. A24 horror, really opened the doors to a new generation of horror fans, and that's really cool. But sometimes I want a fucking movie where there's a ballerina who's a vampire, and they have to Kevin Durant gets stabbed like 14 times in the chest with his own crucifix. Like, that's fucking fun. I want a lot of that too, and I want to watch when people go pop. I want to see a dance number where Catherine Newton is being mind controlled because she's been bit, and she's doing like a whole routine. Like, that's cool. Like, those are the things that I remember. There's a reason why I love films like The Perfection, because they take big, weird, sloppy swings, and sometimes it doesn't work, but when it does, it's so cool.
Yeah, and I think the issue here, not think or like I'm not saying it is, but this is an R-rated version where Megan, the comparison point, is PG-13, and it
Sure.
had like the TikTok appeal. It had that had everything marketably going for it in the right way that it could absolutely turn into that kind of success. Where I feel like weirdly the Abigail marketing fell off a little bit towards the end, and it's hard R. So like, when you make a hard R horror movie in this vein about a ballerina vampire, you are narrowing your viewership down to an maybe unfortunate demographic where like some of the old gatekeeping guards who might go, all right, well, we want more R-rated horror movies, but not the one that stars like a girl vampire, like who's a ballerina. Why do I want to see that? Like shit like that. I'm not saying that's what played into it, but I am saying when you make an R-rated horror movie, no matter how ambitious you are, what you do, you are kind of cutting off some part of the genre. And I don't. I still say make the movie. I'm still very pro of that. I think we're totally fine doing that, but Abigail is kind of the consequence of the risk. Like that's what happens
Yeah.
sometimes. But yeah, also just calling out too that like Steven Shields and Guy Busick were the writers here, and I think they took as much of a risk like writing that script and Radio Silence coming in to direct it. I think just means more because it
Yes.
wasn't like a Radio Silence project through and through. They came in and were like, "Nah, this script fucking rules. Let's make this weird fucking movie." So I just appreciate that there are people out there that are trying to do this and trying to do exactly what we're talking about. And they're not all going to be hits. That's just the reality of it. I don't know why this one didn't do as well as it did. It's the same conversation of like the Fall Guy. I don't
Yeah.
understand why that underperformed the way it did, but we have also created a cinematic ecosystem that is about streaming and movies going to VOD in fucking weeks at this point. So like, yeah, maybe a bunch of people were like, "Hey, this sounds pretty rad and cool," but either I can't see it in theaters because I'm too young, or it's something that I'm going to be able to see it on streaming, and I don't want to gamble in theaters. So we've created this for us, and I think that is part of the problem. But still, there are so many unknowns at this point. It's impossible to say what did cause that. I just know that this movie made me laugh a whole good deal, and I'm happy about it.
So when we bring a guest on and we do a full hour episode talking about the movie and their careers and stuff, we always end with the question of like, how does this movie get rediscovered? For a film like Abigail, it's going to be fine. Like a wide release film, it's going to be part of the conversation for a couple of years. So I propose that we end with a different final thought, which is a little segment I'm calling Monocle movie, Donato movie, or both. Is Abigail a Monocle movie, a Donato movie, or both? Donato.
Well, I mean, you kind of answered it a little before. I think it leads more Donato movie. If we're looking at the scale is definitely tipping towards my side. I'm trying to think of the elements that bring in from the Monocle side, though. Um,
Maximalism.
I mean, there is max. That is true.
That
This
is
is a
that is there.
maximalist.
I want a movie that does absolutely nothing or everything. There's no fucking middle ground. I need like Hagazusa or Abigail. Literally nothing in the middle. I want you to do nothing, or I want you to do the most of everything for as much as possible.
So the maximalism with you is the acting, is the violence, is the push in the story where it goes. Like that is the
Yes.
maximalism that you're
Yeah.
appreciating
I,
here.
it,
Because
it is when I can sense that a movie is going too far, that is when I am right there with it. Again, which is why I love stuff like I'll name drop The Perfection again. The Perfection is very much a maximalist movie. The two of my favorite horror films of all time, The Perfection, all of it, all at once, the most of everything. Black Coat's Daughter, the least of everything. Like outside of a couple of scenes, really really slow burn. And those are my two modes: slow burn or nothing but junk food. um, and this is you're right, I sort of spoiled it, but this is the question we're going to ask going forward. Is I think this is a both. I think that this is a
yeah,
Donato movie, but it's also a Monaco movie.
yeah. I mean, it is because we both liked it. That's also the reveal, like too, like us saying we both liked it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
there's no mystery there. But I this is an interesting one for me because I think it did lean more my side. So I wasn't sure if you were gonna buy into like the midnighty vibes of it and where it kind of leans really heavily into being that kind of upper echelon B grade horror movie. So I'm glad it worked in that way.
Yeah. I loved it. I really did. All right. We're just at about the 30-minute mark. So Donato, last thoughts, and where can people connect with you online?
Last thoughts are go watch Abigail and spend money, whether that's buying the physical or going to rent it online. So at least let's try to get some more cash in the system and bolster its stats a little bit. And on that note, you can find me as always at Donatobomb, Twitter, Letterboxd, Instagram. I guess I'll throw Tiki Taki out there, Blue Sky, all the socials, and yeah, just got more reviews, more things coming out. Who knows? Maybe a Star Wars thing. Even I wrote about a fucking Star War.
Oh, that's going to be interesting. I don't think I've used a Star Wars guy. You can follow me on social media, mostly on Blue Sky, also on Instagram. Search for my name, Monogle's Good SEO. And then, as always, we encourage you to visit certifiedforgotten.com, where we have amazing, amazing film criticism coming from some of the most talented writers, horror writers out there today. And if you really like what you see, we would strongly recommend you sign up for our free Patreon at patreon.com/certifiedforgotten to get our weekly newsletter. And then from there, if you like what you're seeing, maybe throw in a couple bucks, $1, $3, $5 a month. Every bit goes to helping our writers flourish. Whew, that is the first episode of Uncertified. I'm loving it. Are you loving it? Do you want to take us out with a weird thing the way we do in the full episodes?
No, I feel like we should save those for the actual episodes. But we got 12, 13 seconds left. If you want to burn until 30.
I'm wrapping it here. Till next time, friends.